It's ancient history now, but who won the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert trades? And find out why on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. My name is Leif Thulin. I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz and get to talk to you guys. As many of you guys may know by now, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan, credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 23 and 24 NBA Combines, Jazz broadcast assistant, and statistician each of the past 4 seasons, and lover of college hoops, so I'll make sure you know what you need to know about your beloved Utah Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, do you think the Jazz won the deals for Donovan and Rudy? Why or why not? And maybe we won one, we lost the other. Let me know. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is just around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app and start planning your future bets now. So today on the show, I'll go through the Donovan Mitchell trade, the Rudy Gobert trade, and grade it fairly, giving you my impression at the time and now, considering what history says in terms of who won the deals. And lastly, I'll predict how the rest of the deals will play out with picks and performances of players acquired in those deals on both sides. So let's dive right in. Let's start with Donovan Mitchell. This is the one that I think is interesting in the sense of it was after the Gobert trade, but it was the one that was really necessary to make. The Jazz needed to make that deal because Donovan was displeased. But let's go through it. So the Jazz traded Donovan Mitchell to the Cavaliers on September 1st of 2022. In return, the Jazz received Lauri, Collin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, 3 unprotected first-round picks, and 2 pick swaps. It's a pretty sizable haul, but of course, Donovan Mitchell, spectacular player. The 3 unprotected first-round picks were 2025, 2027, and 2029. The 2 pick swaps are in 26 and 28. And then Collin Sexton, in order to make the money work of this deal, agreed upon a 4-year, $72 million deal on the sign-and trade to join the Jazz. That was to make money even with, because Donovan Mitchell obviously had an enormous contract. So to assess whether a good deal or not happens on how the picks go is essentially what you'd be assessing, because Donovan Mitchell's the best player in the deal. So do the Jazz get good picks is really going to be the determining factor of how the deal goes. And we're not quite done with drafting the players, and we don't know who we'll pick. But we knew that making this deal. We know that right now. But contextually, I must add that the Jazz had to deal Donovan due to his lack of contentedness, to put it mildly, in Utah. And it was either he walks for nothing or we make this deal. So keep that in mind. I think the price was more than fair considering it, but it's always hard to give up a guy who is the face of the franchise at the time. The Cavs seemed to come out of nowhere, for those of you who remember this, as a trade partner. They were smart to do so, but the Jazz should be thankful for that, because I think what the deal the Jazz got was better than what was the offer from the Knicks that everyone believed to be the best one. So per my research and sources, here's the reporting in 2022. This is from an article I pulled. New York had the assets Utah preferred, and the sides seemed to be inching closer to a trade Sunday night into Monday, but the Knicks balked on including Quentin Grimes in a trade with R.J. Barrett to acquire Mitchell, sources said. When guard Emmanuel quickly was proposed as a replacement for Grimes in the trade, Utah wanted 3 unprotected first-round picks as part of the package, but New York would only do a 3rd first-round pick that included top 5 protection, sources said. Those packages would have included Milwaukee's 2025 first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, 2 pick swaps, and 2 expiring contracts from a 3rd team, sources said. New York would have moved out Fournier and a first-round pick to a 3rd team to spare Utah taking on Evan Fournier's remaining $37 million. So, with that said, I think the Jazz came out on the benefiting side of not dealing with the Knicks, because I think the Jazz got better players. Lowry's better than RJ. Sexton, you could argue, is better than Grimes. I don't think he's better than Quickly. In fact, I would gladly take Quickly over Collin Sexton if you were to pick and choose the best in that. But Lowry's the win. And so that's the interesting part. Lauri, to me, was the main piece of this deal. Always was and always would be. But many I spoke with and worked for on radio shows at the time thought more highly of Collin Sexton, which stunned me to my core, because Lauri Markkanen is 7 feet tall, runs, and shoots well. That said, I had no clue how prolific he'd be in year one with the Jazz. He had just come off a year where he scored like 13 points in the Cavs, playing the small forward for the first time. But his traits were rare. He went to the Eurobasket, dominated just like he's doing this summer. And Collin Sexton has never moved me. Never has in college, never did in the NBA. He was an empty calorie scorer in both. And I still feel that way, frankly. So let's go year by year. Year one, many would argue the Jazz won this deal outright because Lauri's 7 foot. He was an all-star game starter, and the narrative is Don can't win being the best player on the team, which still could be true. Time will tell on that one. But Donovan scored 28.3 points per game that year. Looked happy in Cleveland, looked engaged defensively, and was 6th in MVP voting, and was second team All NBA for the first time. Like, I don't know why the narrative was that the Jazz won that deal. It was just because Lauri was better than people thought. But Donovan was spectacular there. The other thing helping the Jazz is now the Jazz are setting eyes on tanking. So the rebuild with Lauri and maybe a really good piece, according to many, in Ochai, then the Jazz start to get worse, and they have these picks with Cleveland and Minnesota. Many were bullish. The issue was, though, that the Jazz drafted 9th after a staggeringly good start, and then the Jazz finished the year poorly and ended with the 9th pick, right? Like that, and they got Taylor Hendricks. And in a draft that contains Wembanyama, that dooms you. That sets you back years. In theory, the Jazz could have won this deal by trading Rudy and Donovan, by being awful and drafting Wembanyama like we had great chances to do, and were the odds-on favorite to be the worst team in the NBA after making these deals. And you get a preeminent shining star who could carry the torch for the franchise for 20 years. That was mismanagement. And Lauri shining brilliantly this year mattered zero compared to this misplay in my mind. And I'll never think that once again. Like, I will never be so certain that no matter how good Lauri is, that was a misplay by the Jazz. And it hurt the Jazz's chance to win this deal. Now, year two, the Cavs got better and the Jazz got worse, but it was still a discussion due to Lauri still playing well, the Cavs not being true contenders that year, but it became clear Ochai did not have the chops and he didn't move the needle, and he was dealt. The Jazz needed to choose a direction that year to tank or to contend, and they started 26-26 inexplicably and finished 5-25 to draft 10th. Choose a direction. You got to do it, and that makes it even more promising for the Cavaliers in terms of if you were to balance this out and say who won the trade. Like, you have to believe they won it because the Jazz drafted 10th, and Lauri, regressed a little that year. Now, year three, the Jazz set the plan in action, and it was clear. Tank, tank, tank. The Jazz went 17-65, 3 years after dealing two staples of the franchise. That doesn't help to go 17-65 because you were supposed to do that sooner. Like, I think that was a recovery of mismanagement from years prior. And at least there's a direction. Worse yet, though, for the Jazz, the Cavaliers won the East. Donovan was a first-team All-NBA member, and deservedly so. And the Cavs, in my eyes, have won this deal. I think largely because Lauri was better than the Jazz knew he would be, and starting 10-3, it hurt the Jazz in my eyes in terms of winning this deal because they kept them from turning over the franchise sooner and in drafts that have the weaponry to get them over the top. 2024, the Jazz didn't need to be bad because there was fewer life-changing or team-changing talents. I would have loved Stephon Castle, but so it goes. Like, that one I can live with. The Wembanyama draft, inexcusable. So the worst part for the Jazz's eyes in terms of winning this deal or not is the Jazz went 2 years without making strides towards improving their future standing by, plodding along in mediocrity. And then the Jazz could land a star from Cleveland's picks. And even in this deal, Cleveland still might win because they're one of the 3 best positioned teams to win a championship. And I think they'll make the finals this season because Jason Tatum's out for the Celtics, Halliburton's out for the Pacers, and the Cavs were already the number 1 team in the East. Donovan winning a title would make me happy as a Donovan Mitchell fan, but it would hurt me as a Jazz fan, especially knowing that we're no closer to the end goal of being a contending team that's better than the team that Rudy and Donovan had rolling for years and years. 3 years out now, and there's time to go, but I think Cleveland won the deal, and I'd be surprised if the Jazz end up winning the deal. Coming up next, we're going to discuss the Rudy Gobert deal that precipitated the Donovan Mitchell trade and see who won that one. All that and more coming up straight ahead on Locked On Jazz. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. So if you want to take a flyer on the MVP race, let me know how you feel about Joe Burrow. That's my lead contender. I think there's some value on that one. You can crown your champ in August. My pick would be the Chiefs because I think Patrick Mahomes is the best player in football. And honestly, I think he's the best quarterback ever. So I'm going to bet on the Chiefs quite frequently throughout the years he's there. And that would be my Super Bowl champ right now. Or if you want to parlay your division winner, dark horses, these two aren't necessarily dark horses, but you can play them together and win some scratch. I like the Eagles and the Texans to win their respective divisions. So visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your futures right now, your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and we're talking about the trades that have formed how the Jazz are right now. But we'll be looking through these in the annals of history to say, did the Jazz win these? So we're going to discuss the Rudy Gobert trade. What exactly was the Rudy Gobert trade? The Timberwolves sent to the Jazz Patrick Beverley, Malik Beasley, and Jared Vanderbilt, Leandro Bolmaro, Walker Kessler's draft rights, which is the 22nd pick, 4 first-round draft picks, 2023, 2025, 2027, and 2029, and they also got a 2026 first-round pick swap. The Jazz to the Timberwolves sent Rudy Gobert. So the discourse around this trade nationally, when it happened, was the Timberwolves gave up way too much. I remember working on a local radio show, and this trade broke early in the show, and I had to re-record my updates and whatnot. And I remembered while I was recording it, because I was just trying to get it done, workmanlike, but the Jazz fan in me was struggling to process. I was like, wow, that is a lot of picks. But I didn't know if I loved it because the trade hinged on an unknown commodity in Walker Kessler. And I'd watched plenty of him at Auburn. He was a fantastic defender. He was a defensive player of the year and deservedly so. But it didn't wow me because I wasn't the biggest Walker Kessler guy in the draft. And the Wolves would be good, so the picks meant less to me, even though the Jazz got a lot of them. That said, even I would admit that was a lot of picks. That was everyone's point. And then you'd talk to the NBA guests, and they'd be like, oh, they got so many picks, it's a steal. But a steal for the Jazz is different. Like, it felt like a reach because if you're saying it's a steal for the Jazz, they must have been giving up an okay player. No, not the best defender in the NBA that single-handedly perpetuated the Jazz's terrible perimeter defense into the top ranks of the NBA year in and year out with porous perimeter defenders surrounding him. Let's go year by year, though, just like we did with Donovan Mitchell. So, year one of this deal, the Jazz won this deal because Walker Kessler was a first-team all-rookie, pleasant surprise. Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt started the year very well, and it earned the Jazz an excellent start, which, as I mentioned, was really a detriment to the Jazz's success as a franchise, where the Jazz will be now. Side story for you guys because it's, a little bit of story time. That was my second year with the Utah Jazz. I was doing stats and I was doing production, and we were still learning more because this is the first year truly removed from COVID, and it was more all-encompassing. 2 of my better friends to this day I met that year working for the Utah Jazz, and they can verify this story, especially one of them who witnessed it live. So one of the jobs as a broadcast assistant is to produce the pregame segments. Well, you do it pregame. You edit the coach's sound. You edit all this different stuff. And throughout the game, features will play with your voice and edit sound from players and coaches. And then after the game, you audio edit something called Jazz Game Rewind. It's a recap of the game using David Locke's call of the game as highlights, and then you narrate around it to make it a fun recap for someone to listen to as if they missed the game and could talk about it with people around the water cooler. It's a fun program. Couldn't recommend it more highly. Loved it. But this specific night, I remember vividly. One of my coworkers, who is now one of my best friends, we talk all the time still. He walks in hyped. The Jazz are 10-3, best in the West, jolly as can be, and the diehard Jazz fan, me, is depressed, absolutely depressed up in the booth. Not because I have to stay late and edit, not at all. I was perfectly content with that. But because the Jazz were 10-3, having the best record in the West. Because what's wrong, he goes. And I said, Victor Wembanyama's in this draft, man. Victor Wembanyama is what's wrong with being 10-3. And he goes, but we're 10-3. And I go, nope, This is the worst thing that could possibly happen. I'm inconsolable that night. He goes, okay, whatever. Leaves me alone. I proceed to do the thing, but I was absolutely right on that night, and that is when I felt like the Jazz made a massive mistake. Anyway, the Jazz won this deal in year one. However, they lost it because of that same thing. They won this deal in year one due to the success of Kessler and, frankly, the struggles of Gobert. But the Jazz also lost this deal and the Mitchell deal in the same year by not using the strongest draft in that time frame to their advantage, which is a small market team is the way to rebuild. I strongly will point to the last 2 years prior to this one, where the Jazz won 17 games, where the Jazz had a direction being great. The 2 years prior were very detrimental to the Jazz's success as a franchise, leading into the future after losing Gobert and Mitchell. Year two, the Jazz were, not particularly good, but really the story was Gobert led the Wolves defensively. They became a juggernaut on defense. He won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year. The Wolves made the Western Conference Finals, and the Jazz drafted 10th. Once again, plodding along in purgatory. And the Jazz no longer could say, wow, our center looks fantastic, and therefore he's going to be better than Gobert, like all these people are saying, as Kessler had a sophomore slump and a kind of defined one. And the other players on the team, like Beasley and Vanderbilt, were long gone by then. They were side successes to begin with. So year two, things look bleak for the Jazz. Year three, Gobert regressed a little bit. His money loomed a bit larger. The Wolves had to make the decisions of who should stay, who to keep, because, it's a bit of an albatross as an aging player is paid that much hanging around the neck of the Wolves. The Wolves had an up and down season, dealt Towns in the offseason prior, yet they finished offensively a very good team. They launched tons of threes. Defensively, they were solid, and then finished 17-4 the regular season, made the Western Conference Finals with Gobert dominating and absolutely destroying the Lakers in a closeout game, showing how necessary he is. So 2 years in a row, the Wolves contended for a spot in the finals. They lost in both Western Conference Finals, and Gobert was a vital factor. Kessler did have a great year for the Jazz last season. The Jazz used the Wolves pick and traded up to get Walter Clayton, and this time it's not a knock on Clayton, but time will tell. Like, he needs to be very good in order to be like anything more than a sub point or a footnote to this story. Like, he'd have to be fantastic and pan out well for the Jazz to rewrite history of this trade, because really what happened is the Jazz got a good season out of Kessler. That's really good. And 3 years later, the Jazz finally got a top 5 pick for sending away their franchise talents, the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. After sending them away, there was a first-team All-NBA guy and a guy the season prior who was a Defensive Player of the Year. So to me, the Rudy deal is yet to be finished, with more value coming in the form of picks because of he's aging out. Mike Conley's aging out. The Wolves do have a preeminent star in Anthony Edwards, who I think is even more valuable than Donovan Mitchell. But there's more value coming in the form of picks for the Jazz coming the way of the Wolves. And the Jazz would have to really get lucky to have the picks mean a ton. And they'd have to draft beautifully from the 15 to 20 spot, the 20 to 25 spot. But I feel confident in saying the Jazz made moves that they needed to make. So some could argue Rudy could have been a part of the Jazz longer, and it was only Donovan that needed to go, as he was the issue. But as we sit today, frankly, the Jazz have lost both deals. And as soon as they started winning too much with Kessler and Lauri looking like steals, that's when the Jazz lost it the most. Like, the best year in terms of both these deals, if you were to go one off, like this is great, this is bad, it was the first year where the Jazz had an all-star in Lauri and an all-NBA or all-rookie first-team member, top 3 vote getter for Rookie of the Year in Walker Kessler. That's when the Jazz lost this deal, because the Jazz were too good to get the star that could actually turn their franchise around, and instead toiled around in mediocrity. And now the Jazz have to prolong the rebuilding process. And now when we have Walker Kessler in the prime of his career, he'll have to be paid a ton, and the Jazz will be brand new to the playoffs then. The Cavs could win a championship. The Timberwolves, a little further off in my opinion, but the Cavs can win a championship next year, and that would be a slight insult to injury, though I'd be elated for Donovan Mitchell. So last segment's on it. It's on its way. How can the Jazz come from behind and win these deals with the picks to come? And what do I foresee these picks looking like? And how could these deals and not end up being a dark era of Jazz basketball? All that and more coming up straight ahead on the Locked On Jazz. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here, filling in for David Locke. The Jazz are in a spot where Yesterday, I spoke about applauding Austin Ainge for clearing the path for the youth, and I appreciate authenticity and intentionality, and that's what he had. Clear intentionality of what he wanted to accomplish. He cleared the space. Like, we lost the deal in terms of Collin Sexton. Collin Sexton, I'm not very high on. I said that early in this. However, he's a better player than Yusuf Nurkic, and he certainly shouldn't be the one sending the pick over. But that's what it took to clear the path. I appreciate that the Jazz are now on a path that I think they should have charted 2 years prior, and that the start of the Will Hardy era was good because you became optimistic about the coach, but it set the Jazz back and hurt his chances to coach one of the better teams. Now he's been signed to a deal, and I think deservedly so. And I hold Coach Hardy in the highest regard. I've really enjoyed listening to him and all the interviews I've attended, but I do think coaching the way he coached and getting the most out of the team in those 2 prior seasons really set the Jazz backwards. Now, the premise of the segment is to see how the Jazz can win these trades. What has to happen? And you got to get creative because I think the Jazz lost them. For the Donovan Mitchell trade, as bad as it sounds, I think it's essentially the Jazz need, when in their prime, with Ace Bailey, plus the future star, whether it's AJ, whether it's Darren Peterson, whether it's Cam Boozer, and you still have Walker and Lauri, the Jazz must achieve more than the Cavaliers did under Donovan Mitchell. Like, let's let it sink in. The Jazz have to be a team that can win a championship because I think the Cavaliers will contend for championships the next couple of years. That's the way they win that deal, in my opinion. Here's my rationale. I don't think the Jazz will gain first-round picks from the Cavs. That will be all that helpful, barring hitting the jackpot on a pick from the late 20s, because the Cavs are one of the 2 best teams set up to contend for a while because Evan Mobley is young, and he's just the defensive player of the year. And Donovan Mitchell is as talented as he is, and they have a program that I believe in. Yeah, Darius Garland may not be the best. Like, they're kind of running that same thing back of Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley, a diminutive backcourt. But they clean up with a defensive player of the year behind them, just like the Jazz did. But they also have another big and some ways. I don't know if Cleveland wins the championship right now, but they're certainly going to be in the mix. And with the new CBA, they have, 4 of the best 50, 55 players. And no other team can say that. And that gives them a chance. That gives them a really good chance. So the Jazz have the 2027 first-round pick from Cleveland, the 2029 first-round pick, plus pick swaps from Cleveland, 26 and 28. Sadly, I doubt, barring big trades or big-time injuries, which you don't wish on anyone, that those picks lead to fruitful places for the Utah Jazz. As for Minnesota, I think there's a world where this core changes in Minnesota. Like, it's going to be Anthony Edwards. Like, that much we do know. But Cat's already gone, and he was a former number 1 pick who's been all NBA because of the money that hangs over their head from the Gobert, from paying Jaden McDaniels. Like, Minnesota's core can change, and it already has with Cat being dealt. And that's a big domino. They made room for Jaden McDaniels. They made room for Naz Reid, but they changed things. Julius Randle's volatile. He's been very good. He was second-team All-NBA a couple years ago. And last year was pretty good, but he's volatile. Rudy is on the decline. I love Rudy Gobert. I will be a Rudy Gobert defender forever. I think he's one of the more misunderstood, disrespected players of the past 10, 15 years. Maybe ever, honestly, especially because the legends of the game disrespect him. But it's true. He's not the same player he was when he was in his prime in Utah. And as his decline happens, potential injury, if Anthony Edwards misses some time, Julius Randle ages out of the prime, they're banking on some serious growth internally. So for the Jazz to win this deal, they can't have Minnesota win a title with Gobert as a central figure, though I'd love it for him to shut up the pundits who criticize him unfairly. I'd love it for Mike Conley and Joe Ingles. But the other way to win this deal is the Jazz have a lot of picks. They have picks in 26, which is a pick swap, in 27 and 29, which is from the Wolves, is they need one of those years the Wolves to be injured, meaning Anthony Edwards is injured, or something goes awry, they have some turmoil, and they can't support Rudy Gobert financially, and his massive contract hangs around them and weighs them down. As he ages and gives diminished returns, the Jazz have some chance of getting a very important pick from that. The Jazz could get a great pick as well from other deals, maybe the Conley deal from 2027. You have picks. The Jazz need to hit on a pick that is not one that they earn by being bad. They need a supplementary pick as they start to improve and are not the worst team in the NBA to be a lottery pick, one that could lead to getting a star that is not contingent upon them being one of the worst teams in the NBA. It's difficult to do, but you'd hope with making so many deals that the most lucrative part of the deal is not meant to be Lauri Markkanen. It's meant to be the amount of picks that were acquired. In the Gobert deal, the reason Jazz supposedly won the deal when it happened was because there were so many picks. You got 5 picks for an aging player. Like, wow. So I think the way that the Jazz win this deal is they hit on a pick that is not theirs by nature, and they hit on some picks that are theirs right now in this year with Ace Bailey, and next year getting a guy like AJ, Darren, or Cam. So the Jazz also have Walker Kessler, who can make a larger contribution, help win, and he's one of the only players in the Jazz I truly believe has a winning game right now. The rest is experimentation, kind of throwing mud at the wall, seeing what sticks. And that's going to get better. I talked about this defensively, but he can help the Jazz win this deal in time because he can be a Jazz man for years, acquired from this deal, and potentially become an All-NBA defender for years to come as the Jazz get better and contend with the likes of Ace Bailey, hopefully AJ DeBanza, Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer. Lauri can still be on the team in his prime. And then you envision the picks that you also got from this help them as either as ammunition to acquire a player using those picks that Minnesota gave, or they can become potential ancillary pieces to building a contender. So that's how I feel about this. Let me know what you guys think about how the Jazz can win the deal. Did they do better in the deals than than I've told you? Because I gave you the straight up truth. Like I am a Jazz homer. I will be forever. I adore the Utah Jazz, but I think the Jazz lost both these trades because it's not often you win trades. You hear about them. You hear about Paul George being given up, and he had an MVP third place season in OKC. He goes to the Clippers, and yet the Clippers got better, and now all you hear about is how they were fleeced because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has become a better player than Paul George. That happens occasionally. The Celtics won the deal with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce going to Brooklyn because Brooklyn gave them Jason Tatum, and they got Jaylen Brown the year before. Like, that stuff happens. However, it's very infrequent. More often that you give up a good player, especially when they're in primes, which KG and Paul Pierce were not, you're going to lose the deal. That's the way it is. I'm curious to see if the Jazz can, at least make the deal closer than they have so far in the Donovan Mitchell one by contending down the road. I think there's a chance the Jazz end up faring all right in the Minnesota deal because there's enough picks that they can use it to get ancillary pieces or use it as trade ammunition in order to find the right guy to boost the core via trade. So let me know what you guys think. I really appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there's no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you guys for listening. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. Really appreciate your support.